joining us today for the ANA's eLearning Academy, more specifically our Money Talks presentation. We're very excited for this opportunity to come together at a time when we're all so far apart. I'd like to give a special thank you to our presenter today that has put in many hours to make this happen. As you may have seen, we have added many new e-learning opportunities to our website, money.org. If you have not checked out our website in the last month or so, I highly recommend jumping on to see the other new presentations we've added, as well as our upcoming schedule. We do have plenty of presentations that have been recently recorded that are archived through our website, so please check those out as well. During this presentation, you may come up with questions, and we hope you do. If you do, please use the chat or Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send in your question, as all of our attendees are muted during this presentation. Your question will come to me and I will share the questions with our presenter at the end. If at the end of the presentation we're unable to get to all of the questions, I will send them to our presenter to answer. Toward the end of our presentation, I will be sending out a survey using the poll feature here in Zoom. Please stay on and answer each question honestly so that we can improve our presentations. The surveys will be shared anonymously with the presenter so that he too can improve if needed. Now I'd like to introduce you to our presenter for the day, Dr. Lawrence C. Korchnak. He will be giving a money talk titled Siege Stories, Tales of Courage and Defiance. So siege warfare has generated a fascinating area of numismatics. With it comes its share of heroes, heroines, and villains. Dr. Korchnak will use coins, medals, and tokens to bring these characters to life with excerpts from his soon-to-be-published work on siege coins, OBSIDIONAL Coins of the World, 1453 to 1902. A little bit of info about our presenter today. Dr. Korchnak is an avid numismatist with varied collecting interests. His main area of specialization is siege money. He also collects the emergency copper coins of Pius VI, Roman denarii, Pennsylvania depression scrip, and Hungarian dinars. He is a life member of the ANA, Numismatics International, PAN, or Pennsylvania Association of Numismatists, and the Western Pennsylvania Numismatic Society. He also belongs to the Society of Paper Money Collectors, or SPMC, and a number of local clubs. Dr. Korchnak has been a collector since childhood and enjoys sharing his passion with others by speaking at local, regional, and national conventions. He has written An Introduction to Siege Money, Dutch Sieges of the 16th and 17th Century, the Shipping Port Ferry Token, and several NPR money talks for the ANA. He was awarded the first ANA Literary Award for Paper Money Studies for Elwood City Depression Script. Dr. Korchnak was the co-chair of the 1989 ANA convention in Pittsburgh, as well as a volunteer at the 2004, 2011, and 2019 Pittsburgh ANA conventions. He has served as the ANA Numismatic Ambassador to the Netherlands and is currently Western Pennsylvania's district representative for the ANA, as evidenced by the red shirt that he is wearing. He also is a regular contributor to the Standard Catalog of World Coins put out by Krause Publications. Dr. Korchnak, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours, sir. Take it away.
Okay, I'm ready. I can do a lot of things, I suppose, because I've been retired, and that's a nice place to be. About what I'm talking today, siege, as Sam said, it's a passion of mine, and I've been collecting since 1972. And so I have put together a number of things. It was hard for me just to take and to wheedle it down to the few sieges that I'm going to talk about, because there are just so many interesting stories. I will say a few things before we begin. I'm going to talk about stories that I think are interesting in using the numismatics, currency, etc., to show them, and pictures, historical accounts and etchings, etc. But there's a lot more detail and complexity to these than what I'm going to say. So I'm going to go into some detail, but I don't want to bore you with all the details. There are some tremendously outstanding works out there on any and all of these things historically. Secondly, I want to remind you before we go that courage and defiance does not necessarily result in victory. A lot of the tales of courage and defiance ended pretty much the way you would have expected, especially in situations where there are unbelievable odds against them. And thirdly, just for your knowledge, the coins and medals and things that I'm showing in this particular slide collection are from my personal collection. I have more of them, but I can only put so many of them in here. So let me begin for you. The first siege that I want to talk about is Constantinople in 1453. On each of the sieges, I put a little summary thing to begin with, so that you get some idea of what's there, what's going. It's the final conflict resulted in the fall of the empire. Turkish city, obviously besieged by Mehmed II and his army of 400,000, and defended, of course, by the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, whose empire was essentially defined by the walls of the city at this point. He was essentially bankrupt, and he was without powerful allies. The Byzantine Empire was reduced, as I said, to the city of Constantinople. And here's an old picture depicting the armies of Mehmed II overlooking the city. Would be, if you looked at it straight up, would be like the horn. And it was always considered a great prize by the Ottomans because it stood so long. Because of its weakness in light of the Ottoman presence around it, Constantinople was seeking, allies from the Roman Empire. In doing so, Constantine XI actually allowed Latin rites, the Latin Mass rites in St. Sophia, which is the Hagia Sophia today, in 1452, and he thought that that would get support from the Pope. When he presented that to the Greek clergy, they unanimously rejected it, and he had nothing to go and have any leverage against Rome. So what happened then, of course, is without any extra allies, Turkish army arrives on April 5, 1453, and they begin their attack. If you can see here, the attack came, the armies would have been on this side, and you can see the city down in the middle. Interesting thing about it is they were doing that and fighting, the defenders stretched a chain across from Galata to the city of Constantinople. And in doing so, it prevented the ships from coming into the Golden Horn, which was another angle for them to attack the city. One of the most amazing things here, and probably one of the reasons why I put this down, was the fact that Mehmed, on the 22nd of April, as you see up in the corner, in one night transported 70 ships across land. And that happened to the total surprise of those defending the city. They woke up the next morning and found an entire fleet flanking their one side, preparing to attack the city. Thought that was rather fascinating, especially given the fact that Constantinople had never fallen. You see the wall of Byzantium, the wall of Constantine, and then, of course, Theodosius II's wall of defense. And so that's how this siege began. Now, given that, you have a man who has no money, you have a man who has essentially held into his own area. He also had a Hungarian gunmaker named Orban, who casts cannons and other weapons. Orban had said to Constantine XI that I can produce a cannon, the largest in the world, that you could use to defend. And I think Constantine might have wanted it, but he had no money. In those days, soldiers who fought in these sieges were mercenaries. They went to whoever paid them. It is reputed, or at least related in history, that many of the finer gunsmiths, etc., moved to the other side because they were paid by the Ottomans and not by Constantine XI. Anyway, Orban said he's going to make him a big cannon, but he refused to accept the cannon, Constantine, because he didn't have money to pay for it. Consequently, Orban offered the same deal to Mehmed II. Now, this is what the cannon probably looked like. That's the style of the cannon. It's not the cannon. The cannon that he built, a guy could crawl into it. Let's put it that way. 27 feet long. It was a huge piece of machinery. It took 6 weeks. It moved 2.5 miles a day from the place where it was cast in Edirne, that would have been Adrianople back in there, those times, and he came and brought into Constantinople. They tested the cannon and it lived up to its promises. It basically beat the heck out of the walls and created a lot of havoc. And because of that, Mehmed stood before Constantine saying, hey, now it's time to surrender. Constantine, in his own defiant mode, said he would not surrender, of course. And when he refused, Mehmed ordered his final attack. Mehmed wanted the city intact. So his orders to his people were, go into the city, do whatever you want to do, but do not burn any of the buildings down. And that's what he did. So on May 29th, he started his grand assault. I don't know if you are aware historically, but the Ottomans at that time, most of their frontline soldiers were slaves. They had gotten them from wherever they had conquered, and they put them in the front line. The Janissaries, their elite troops, weren't the ones who fought first. They sent the front lines, and they filled the moats with corpses. That's how they got over the moats and into where they needed to do. When it got that bad, Constantine took off his royal robes and went out to fight with the troops. That's how much he was committed to it. And in doing so, he was killed pretty much with everyone else. He was essentially identified reportedly through history by the royal seal that were on his socks when he was in a pile of dead corpses. Now, in 1988, there was a hoard of coins discovered containing 50 1/8 stavratis or 1/16 hyperpyrons. The number you see in the top here is a number that I attributed to this particular coin in my catalog that's coming out. Just as in a shameless move of self-promotion, the catalog will have a uniform numbering system, but this number will refer to all the other major sources: Maillet, Braus and Mansfield, Doobie, any of the others, Van Hoot, any of the major pieces work that are spread out describing all these coins. But that's what that number stands for. So when you see a number, it's the number that I ascribed to it in the book. This is a 1/16 hyperpyron. This is probably the size of a dime. It shows Pancreator, Jesus on the one side, very crude, and it shows Constantine. How do you know it's his? Well, you know this is his. This was found in a hoard by, I'm trying to remember, Simon Bendel wrote it up in Numismatic Française, I believe, a number of years ago. It's escaping me now. But all the coins of John VIII would have had a different inscription. This has a KI. With the K, that indicates that this particular coin was indeed struck by Constantine. Now, KI is one of many. They have KI, TN, KT, TN, KC, TN, all the different combinations, but the K indicates it's from Constantine. And you can see the crudeness of this particular coin, because those who had the skills to do this type of work in making dies were probably fighting for the other side, making weapons for them. But this is one of 50 in the hoard, and as reported in history, this particular coin was used as one day's wages for a soldier who defended the city. When I collect siege coins, my collection of siege coins is precisely those, not all just necessity coins, because siege coins are necessity coins, but not all necessity coins are siege coins. But I don't want to get into that. This is the 1/8 stavrata, very interesting. Second siege I want to talk about, and I'm going to go in chronological order, is Famagusta in 1570-71. Again, Ottoman wars of the 16th century. I don't know if you like to read history as much as I do, but there's an excellent book by Roger Crowley named Empires of the Sea, and it talks about that time where Venice was declining in its influence in the Mediterranean due to the rise of the Ottomans in the Islamic Empire. So Lala Mustafa attempted to persuade the city to give up without a fight. This is what the ramparts of Famagusta look like today. It was not like Malta. Malta siege occurred in Malta 5 years earlier, but the Ottoman siege of Malta failed more as a result of the fact of where it was located than the fact that they had been overpowered. Famagusta was not like Malta. Malta was built on rocky crags. Famagusta was on sandy soil. So what happened is the Ottomans were able to just do whatever they needed to do. You can see here in depicting the dunes and the sands, they surrounded Famagusta and they tunneled and set up their siege works. A side thing on sieges. Sieges don't mean attacks all the time. Within sieges, there were attacks. There were sorties from those inside out and those, of course, from the outside to bombard. But the frontal attacks didn't occur very often because sieges were designed to starve out or to wait out those who they were getting. And Famagusta was no different. So they had them surrounded and they were hoping to hold them off. They tunneled under the walls, they planted explosive. They had, Bragadin was the commander of the Famagusta, of the defenders, and the Greek citizens were very, very upset. They knew that they were going down and what they needed to do was surrender. And they tried to force him to surrender. And after a while of getting bombarded by the Ottomans, he finally surrendered. And it was supposed to come off as an honorable surrender. I don't know if you understand too, and then my readings of history when I first got there, that there are interminable accounts of these horrible sieges and fights. And when they were done, they come to terms on an honorable surrender, which oftentimes said, okay, you're done, we come take the city, you guys all have to leave, or the soldiers have to drop their arms, or something more honorable. Well, there was supposed to be something like that happening to Famagusta. Bragadin held out so long. They went to the ceremony on July 22nd for the terms, and something went horribly wrong. Nobody knows what. We just have historical accounts of saying that promises were broken, things were not the way they were supposed to be. One side accused the other side of lying. Maybe they did, who knows? At any rate, Lala Mustafa ordered the murdering and the slaughter of all the Christians in Famagusta. So all the remaining Christians were killed, the Muslims were allowed to survive, and Bragadin was flayed, quartered, and his body parts were given to the troops as trophies. Not very good. He was very defiant, but it didn't work too well. This is a typical coin. I have the two pieces here. This is a siege coin from Famagusta, the Lion of St. Mark, because Famagusta was, of course, under the protection of the Venetian Empire. It's part of that, and then Venezio, etc. And this one is one Byzante, and this one has the mark F for Famagusta. You'll see two types. You have this particular one with the F and one without the F. That's a very interesting coin. Not extremely rare. You do see these and they come across them very often. The next siege, Haarlem. The most prolific time of sieges in history was the 80 Years' War, when the Dutch Republic was forming and they were trying to break away. The Netherlands, the Low Countries, were breaking away from Spain, Philip II of Spain. Philip II's predecessor, Charles V, he spoke Dutch, he was understanding. Philip II came in, and when Philip II came in, he was a very, very staunch and conservative Roman Catholic, and he demanded that his subjects follow his faith. This is a classic example of not a separation of church and state. Anyway, 80 Years' War, the Duke of Alba came with 25,000 troops, and we had a town of 40,000 local army men and a corps of 300 women. Needless to say, they fought and tried to get an agreement, and even though there's two A's, it wasn't a good agreement, sorry for the typo, and there was an honorable capitulation. They did reach it, and again, pretty much like Famagusta, it went down. Haarlem, they rejected. Here was the map of the city. You can see many of the cities in the Netherlands had series of canals. It was the Low Countries. You have the windmills, as you can see in this old etching or this old picture, and the city, of course, sitting like that. With 25,000 versus 4,000 locals, it wasn't much. However, You did have at that particular point, seeing on there, again, as the things set up around the type of battle that they were setting up, and standard siege, they build their siege works. Even before they build their siege works, they will tear down trees, they will tear down outbuildings, and they will set up their siege works. You see the ships coming in to the canals around the city of Haarlem. The women of Haarlem, 300 of them, the women of Haarlem formed the core and stood with the men in defense of the cities. Not the only time during sieges where you had some other people coming than the people that were hired, the mercenaries that were hired to defend, or the soldiers or whatever, the townspeople. But this was rather interesting. The first interest, and it was a nasty fight, but the first issue of coins, two types of coins, is this is a typical one where it has the arms of Haarlem, the sword with the four stars, unifaced silver issue. This is a 32 stiver, 1572. These were used to pay the troops. And this, in an effort to increase pay, they created these. They didn't have the regular coins. They had to make coins out of necessity. So they took pieces of metal, of course, cut them into pieces, weighed them out the way they should be, and stamped them so that they could use to pay the mercenaries. Mercenaries needed to be paid. Otherwise, they would do what they did in Constantinople, and the soldiers would go to the other side and take their pay there. At any rate, this is it. Prince of Orange sent 200 troops in, and they were totally wiped out in a nearby swamp. The commander, his head was cut off and thrown over the city walls, and the enraged defenders decided to do the same. So they did a sortie. They captured 12 prisoners, decapitated 10 of them, put their heads in a drum and rolled the drum into the camp. And that was not very well appreciated by the Spanish. This thing dragged on very ugly, and they issued a second type of coin, very much cruder. You don't see them in top grade very much, but this is a half a gulden. Still similarly with the date, this is 1573, and the sword and the 4 stars, that's the symbol or the coat of arms of the city of Haarlem. And that's one that they did. Well, they dragged on, of course, and they kept fighting. And when it came time that to be honored, there was no honor. I took this particular etching out. There were 1,800 defenders who survived. They were marched into the public square there, as you could see. 600 were hanged and put to the sword, and the remaining 1,200 were tied together and drowned. The records now say that virtually the entire population was killed by Alba and his son Don Federico, including women and children. It was absolutely bloody. And they did that because they wanted to create a scare. It was one of the earlier sieges, and Philip II wanted a horrible example, hoping that they would capitulate when the Spanish armies would come to the next city. And that's what they did. They went to the next city. The next city was Alkmaar in 1573. Again, in the 80 Years' War, 16,000 men, Duke of Alba, defended by the citizens, just simply the citizens under Governor Sonoy and the States General. In this one, as you'll find out, support came from the sea beggars. I'll explain that a little bit later. Don Federico was hoping that the new brutality, all the brutality that just happened in Haarlem, would really, really unnerve the Dutch citizens there. And so he figured that he would come in and it would be an easy battle. Well, it didn't. They heard about what happened, and when they heard about what happened, they discovered that they were not going to give up. And they knew that surrender would mean death, and they had the city gates locked, and they dug in for the long haul. Now, the sea beggars came in, and the reason why I mentioned them, the sea beggars were a bunch of pirates. That's what they're named, the Vaterguzen, or les gueux in French, and these people will fight for whomever. Well, they decided to ally with the Dutch, and they did during the 80 Years' War, basically. So when they fought, they went with William of Orange and the revolutionaries against Spain. So the sea beggars came under a guy Jacob Caballou, and he sided with the Dutch. But he came in now that they had allies, and these people were ready to fight. They were going for a while. The mayor, in his own defiant mode, even said at one point, because during long sieges, the people faced starvation, they illnesses, they were eating the cats, the dogs, the horses, whatever, anything. And in some sieges, and I have siege coins that are made out of leather because they had to make money to pay the troops. But in long sieges, even those leather coins would have been eaten because they had organic material and provide sustenance. People in long sieges ate leather, the leather off their horses, the leather off their clothes, and this one was no different. And the mayor of Alkmaar, in a very valiant move, stood before them and offered his arm. He basically said, if you're that hungry, you may cut off my arm and eat it. Rather than face starvation, we're not going to surrender. Well, they continually bombarded the city, but William of Orange, who was leading at this point, an informal leader of the rebellion. He didn't become the formal leader until around 1581. But in 1573, he was leading the rebellion. And so he had to make a very important decision. The sea beggars are what they said. Those were sea beggars. They needed their ships. You had to get to the city. And so in order to get to the city, the Dutch did a number of things, not as much here as later on in Leiden. You'll see inundated a large portion of Holland, but they did break some of the dikes so that they can let water in and allow the ships to come in. And so Cabelleux and his sea beggars came in after William of Orange agreed to the request of the defenders to open some of the dikes. You might say, why didn't they do it earlier? They didn't do it earlier because when you drown the countryside, you also destroy your crops. In another siege, which I'm not going to talk about here, one of the defenders decided not to flood the countryside and pick up the crops so that they wouldn't waste them. But eventually, because he didn't flood the countryside, he did succumb to a siege. Back to this particular siege. They bombarded, the soil around the city was marshy, and the ships came in with the beggars, and they were able to beat back the Spanish. And this is the first instance of the Dutch winning in one of the battles during the 80 Years' War. They struck coins, as you can see. Here's a bombarding the city on that. The water was there. They needed to bring the ships in here, and they did. They came through. Fighting was terrible. Yep. Anyway, that's Alkmaar. And there's the coins. I'm moving them too quickly. These are the two coins, two type coins that were produced there: a 32 stiver and a quarter thaler. They were tin, lead, whatever. They were very simple. They were uniface. And showed the tower of the city, which was its symbol, and that's what they used to pay the troops. This was, of course, when they made coins out of these base metals, the promise is after the siege, you can get your money back. You take the coin and get a silver 32 stiver piece or a silver quarter thaler piece if you won. If you didn't, they weren't worth much anything. They were just souvenirs, and if they were of intrinsic value, if they made silver medals like you saw the Haarlem piece back, they could take that Haarlem piece and melt it because it had intrinsic value. Other ones, they didn't. These were base metal pieces. Leiden in 1573 and 74, again in the 80 Years' War. Valdez and the Spanish army defended by Pieter Angienzon, 11,000 citizens. And this is one where they really did open the dikes, Leiden. It's also the one that produced paper siege money, and we'll talk about that later. I had the good fortune to become in communication with a pair of professors who gave a very erudite and historical account of not only the siege, but the production of the coins, and corrected many mistakes that were in Maillet or Brass and Manfeld or any of the earlier pieces. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So this was Leiden, as you can see, just like many of the Dutch cities, a lot of waterways coming around. Of course, it's not uncommon for those cities to have walls and of course to have moats. And that would be basically, the canal would be basically functioning like a moat. And that's basically what we do. The Spanish set up their fortification around, okay, cut off the city immediately from all outside support. And Leiden was in a poor state of readiness anyway. They for whatever reason, I guess they didn't expect that the armies were going to come there. So money was scarce, even to the upper class. And the shortage of it wouldn't allow the people who ran the city to pay the troops. So William of Orange actually approved the production of paper coins. Now, most people, when you look at Leiden, always see the silver pieces and say, yes, in sieges, you made money out of intrinsic value coins, silver, and then it moved to those lower means, to the copper, to the tin, to the paper. In this way, it was reversed. The paper coins were produced first. They were produced under the approval of William of Orange to fulfill the shortage there. So what they did was, to make paper money, is they took missals and hymnals from the Roman churches, because the Netherlands at that point were strongly Calvinistic and Protestant after the Protestant, the Protestant Reformation, and they took the prayer books. And this is one of those. This is I believe, a quarter golden, and it's broken, and you can see the writing that would have been on that. So what happened is a bookbinder, Jan Andrenes, took these missals and hymnals and he pasted them together like sheets, like you would have sheets of metal. And then he would cut the sheets into round planchets and strike those planchets into coins. Now, there are some question as to who made the planchets, because there was no mint there at that time, but they did seem to be able to make them, and there probably were some silversmiths and that who were able to do it. But anyway, this is what they did. They pasted them together. And this was the first issue. This was the first issue of coins, not the silver ones, but the paper ones. 3 gulden, 10 stiver piece. Okay, 3, and you can see it's the Lion of Holland, 1574. Now, understand, this was minted in 1573. I should have gone over these better. I apologize. 1573, 3 gulden, but all of them were dated. They were the paper coins were made in December of 73, but were dated 74, and you can see the arms of Holland. And then this is the quarter golden, the 5 stiver, 1573. Yeah. The thing to note is you'll see these with and without this counterstamp, the small ones. And the reason why you see them is because when they were first issued, people realized at that time during that siege that they could make money off it. So they tried to make their own coins. And so they would recall them, check them out again, put a stamp on them and tell them this is a genuine one. So the other ones that you see without a stamp aren't genuine. So that's how that happened. Now, when these were counterstamped, there also was a half a stiver done. Let's see if I have that. There we are. That's the half a stiver. And I also have an 1/8 stiver. And the reason why I have that is later on, these were restruck during a second siege, the second stage of the siege, and they were devalued down to 1/8 stiver. At any rate, that's what the coin would look like, a small copper piece on it. Pretty interesting. Pretty typical. Cross keys, Leiden, the Lion, 74, the date. Now, what happened is, I won't go to the next one yet. At this particular point, after there was a siege, Valdez, who was besieging the city, discovered that there was a Dutch army forming some distance away. So what he did was he left. When he left, he took off to go get that army, to prevent that army from coming together and fighting him at Leiden. So he went, and there was a brief lull. Now, during that lull, the people in Leiden redeemed all of the paper coins for silver. This is the 28 stiver silver. that was one of the redemption pieces. This one has been etched. This happens a lot. I like this one because the etching is there to show that it was kept by somebody initialed on the sides on the reverse here, and they were pretty much revered by those. So I find it fascinating. So they took those paper ones and turned them in for these ones, and this is a 14 stiver. And this 14 stiver is in clippy form, and there's also they also cut them around. That again, they took the paper ones and then they redeemed them from silver. Unfortunately, after Valdez wiped out this force that was supposed to help them, he came back to the city and they weren't ready for that either. So he had them surrounded one more time, and he sent a letter promising people if they would come in and they would give up and cause everyone to surrender, things would be fine, and they were exhausted and everything, but the mayor would not permit them to do so. So these guys stood up. Citizens were eating their horses, rats. They were making the flour. They made flour. They crushed parchment. And there was also a plague, and a lot of people don't realize that the plague came about and it hit the city people as well as hit the besiegers. But the mayor stood pat. He reminded them of what happened at Haarlem. Again, if you remember, they thought at Haarlem if they were merciless, it would scare them into submission, and all it did was build their resolve. And so he said that would happen here, and we can't let that happen to us. Now, William of Orange is sitting in a far-off place because he's not fighting at this point. He's out there trying to figure out doing some things on his own, and he needs to give some permission because now the sea beggars said, we need to get our ships in there to help them. And so he finally and reluctantly at the end inundated the entire countryside. Roughly half the province of Holland went, and also destroyed all the crops. But it allowed the sea beggars to approach the city. Got close enough to defend the city, but not close enough to beat off the defenders. But guess what? Nature was on their side. A large storm out at sea blew waves in and were able to then bring the rest of the ships in, and those particular ships were able to come help the cause, routed the besiegers, and they welcomed the liberators. There's a round one. So you should have moved up on that one for them. And they did what they needed to do. Now, what you need to know is you see these periodically. This is a paper, 30 stiver. I'm going to go down to the next one, okay? And that is a 28 stiver. These were generally, for a period of time, considered siege coins. And through the research of the two professors in Netherlands, realized that these weren't. The fact that they won and that they were so valiant and that they were so sneaky in getting the dikes broken to get the ships in, people were happy about that. And so they created these coins afterwards as a commemoration. So I have them here because they're considered siege and include them in the book because they're post-siege issues that are so closely allied. But if you look at them closely and you read some of the inscriptions, you'll note that the inscriptions couldn't have come from 1573 and 74. One of the inscriptions actually, then here's a 28 stiver, another gorgeous paper piece that I have. And again, the similar to the ones that were struck during the siege, but not struck during the siege. The reference is to William as governor of the Netherlands, and this was 1573, and as I mentioned earlier, William didn't become governor till 1581. Well, the sea beggars came in, and they were welcomed with fantastic joy, and they brought food with them. And this is a medal commemorating the sea beggars relieving the city of Leiden. So. Next siege, Oudewater. Large contingent of Spanish troops, 4 companies of Dutch rebels, and a pledge to fight to the death. I probably could write that about almost all of these, but this particular siege was almost the horror of this siege was promulgated by both sides, and you'll see what I mean. This is the city of Oudewater. And again, it's around water and it runs canals and things like that. They pledged to fight to the death when they heard of the Spanish atrocities in the other sieges. Once again, instead of scaring them, it made them more resolved to fight. So they cut the besiegers, cut off the city by means of the river, and so all the supply line was gone. And this time, because these people were very well upset, they would, while they were being besieged and trying to be cut off, they would come out and they would enact sorties against the besiegers. What also that they would do is along the walls of this particular city, they would go into the Spanish were of course predominantly Roman Catholic, and that's why it was the Spanish form of Inquisition by Philip II, which one of the darkest periods of world history, tried to impose that same thing into the Netherlands. And so there was that religious confrontation that came as a Protestant versus a Catholic. And in this case, they went into the churches, got the sacred vestments and religious art and the vessels and all of that, and they paraded along the wall in front of the Spanish troops to enrage the Spanish troops, to make fun of them perhaps. I think more likely they knew that they were not going to get out alive, and they didn't want the citizens to surrender. So by doing that, they weren't paying the Spanish back for any atrocities. They were ensuring that the citizens were committed to defend the city to their death, because they know they'd get no mercy from their attackers. So at any rate, the battle ensued, and it was a pretty vicious battle. Again, surrounded, and you see the classic siege works. They set themselves up, wait them out, and then begin to bombard. And they bombarded them for a long time. Eventually, they entered the city in full force. And in this particular case, they plundered. They did everything. They plundered, they killed, they hung. As you can see, this one, this the person shows they're hanging children out the window and dropping them, killing women. Men were slaughtered. City was going into flames. Eventually, the city was burned to the ground. But some citizens didn't want the Spanish to take the city, so they began to burn their own houses. So you had the combination of those inside who precipitated further ill will by performing sacrilegious acts and committing the people to fight to the death, and the Spanish who were enraged and wanted to take the whole city down, effectively wiped out the entire city. They struck tin coins like this, Oudewater, 1575, 20 stiver, one uniface pieces, rather crude, but it was not a long siege, but they made these, of course, to pay the troops to defend the city. The next siege, Zierikzee, again during the 80 Years' War. Now, I put this in here because it's an interesting story, because the city was defended by a very crafty colonel or commander. At any rate, the city did go under, as you can see on the last line, defended by 1,200 soldiers, 3,400 Spanish troops. There's Zierikzee. The provincial governor became aware of the siege. He had a great plan. He put together a really neat plan, and that's why I want to tell this story. He wanted to deceive the besieging army under Mondragon into believing that he and his people at sea were going to negotiate a surrender. So he got two other local magistrates, got permission under the pretense of trying to persuade the soldiers to give up. He wanted to go meet with them so they can go persuade the soldiers to give up. Instead, they weren't persuaded to give up to Spanish terms. they were instructed to prepare for battle. So they used it as a confab, where in this clandestine meeting, they established where the dikes would be broken, how they'd smuggle soldiers and ammunition into the city. They discussed basically how best to defend the city. And in short, they worked pretty much every little detail and measure to maximize their advantage over the Spanish. So when the plans were done, this Vosbergen, cast with the provincial governor, Vosbergen, went and told Mondragon, he said, sorry, I can't convince him. So you have to let me go to the city, and so I can tell the townspeople that we were unable to reach an agreement and we can't come to terms. Well, he did return to the city. The only trouble is he never came back to the ship. And by the time the Spanish realized he wasn't going to come back, and he was back there helping the townspeople plan to defend the city, there it was. They fortified the city, they flooded the town, the high water submerged most of the ramparts, made it very unusable to do the siege work, and forced them to then to go into a different port of the siege. And so they were doing that, and they showed as they flooded some of the territory, because they broke the local dikes. They didn't flood the whole country. They broke the local dikes and made it difficult for the Spanish to fight. So they still tried it, and unfortunately, they still couldn't fight off the Spanish, and they had to surrender. Garrison was able to leave with their weapons. Again, this was at least an honorable surrender. They didn't massacre the citizen. They were ordered to pay 200,000 florins or the city would be plundered. And since they went into the city and they know that the city had nothing, they reduced their demand to 100,000 with the condition that 3 of the wealthiest people in the town would be taken hostage until the debt was satisfied. So while they didn't win the battle, at least they got out with honor, and they paid 100,000 guilders or florins. And I guess the 3 wealthy people were collateral for that one. They had a chain across to keep the ships away. This is what they were. A lot of these pieces in Zierikzee, 48 and 24 stivers. These are lead pieces, struck in lead. You can see they're deteriorated over time, but that's what they were. And they redeemed those, of course. Later on, there were some silver pieces, but those were post issues. Some of them would generally consider those as part of the siege. No, those were done later. This is what was done during the siege. Yeah. Tournai, 80 Years' War. Alessandro Farnese, 21,000 people, defended by Christine Lalaing. The reason why I put her there, she was outstanding. Protect the city when her husband took off. Now, he didn't take off because of the siege, he was gone. So they used that. Yeah, when we had it, that was an opportunity, and that opportunity came. The Dutch were allied with the French, but they couldn't come to an agreement, a chain of command for the French troops in Flanders. And so the governor Despinois, left to go to try to work this out. And while he was there, the Alessandro Farnese saw his opportunity to attack. So this is what he did. He attacked. And now, Tournai had several weak fortifications, but it had one strong castle, and that strong castle was built during the English occupation of the city. Most people don't know that from 1513 to 1519, Henry VIII, as a young man in his early 20s, wanted to expand the British Empire, and he went over and with his army, and he took Tournai. He was going to besiege it, but Tournai was smart. They looked out, saw thousands and thousands of troops. They gave up and allowed the English to occupy, and the English occupied Tournai for 6 years, 1513 to 1519. During that time, Henry VIII built a castle, and that was the strongest part of the city. But in spite of this, it was a small garrison, but at any rate, the small garrison did fight well. Well, 2 weeks into the siege, they didn't have a governor. The garrison had to choose somebody to command the troops. And they got Christine Lalaing, the governor's wife. City here, being sit there, all covered around, getting ready to fight. Now you set up the battle, and they fought, and they fought. He didn't have anyone to lead them at this point. They were going with whatever they did, so they chose the wife of the governor, Christine Lalande. She's legendary. She was a capable substitute for her husband. She had a deep hatred for Philip II, as most of the Dutch revolutionaries did. And she opposed any pressure from wealthy citizens to give up. It just wasn't in her blood to do so. They say she handled weapons like a trained soldier, and she stood in the front lines and fought. And that's what this etching shows, her in the front lines fighting with her troops. At one point, she was shot in the arm with a musket ball, took 10 days to recover, and she went back out to fight, urging her troops to resist the oncoming Spanish. Well, in spite of that, in spite of her heroic actions, Tournai didn't hold out. Now, they did do an honorable surrender here. The terms were all set up, and it allowed Lalande and her troops to march out of the city through a gauntlet of Spanish soldiers. Strangely enough, the Spanish honored her and cheered her as enthusiastically as she was cheered by her own, because as a woman, she stood so well to lead her troops and fought. I thought that that was an interesting story, showing that, aside from 300 women fighting at Haarlem, and I'm sure other women fighting with the fighters, with the people, then you've got these. So you've got women fighting as well. This is the coin. That was them coming out. I did pick this up and show them cheering as they left the city. And this is typical of that coin from 1581. It's copper. It's meant to be in copper. That's not a fabrication. That's a genuine piece from 1581. There's scarcer ones. The 1581 Tournai pieces are scarce. Reputedly, a 1521 Tournai piece, which are counterstamped on other coins. So that's dubious, but still basically a siege coin in many people's eyes. And then, of course, the ones that we all know, the 1709s with Tournai pieces. Yeah. Pontefract Castle, very quickly. English Civil War, the Great Rebellion. Parliamentarian troops led by John Lambert, defended by John Morris and Scottish Royalists. And they stuck in even after Charles I died. This is an interesting one because in the surprise action, the Pontefract Castle was taken by Scottish Royalists who disguised themselves as peasants, and they were led by Colonel John Morris, and they overwhelmed the defending garrison. So they took possession, but Cromwell didn't like that, and he attacked and he killed very, very many people. And Charles I was taken into custody. This is Pontefract Castle as it was painted. It doesn't look like that today. It's in ruins, but that's the painting of Pontefract Castle. And that's John Morris. And that's why I figured it'd be nice to show him, because that was a pretty gutsy thing to fake him out like a peasant and then sneak up and then take the seasoned troops. There are two essential types of coins made there. Now, there are more than that, but this is a 1648 shilling of Charles I. Carolus Rex, Dum Spiro, Obsessa, that's obsidional. Obsessa is the Latin word for besiege. 1648, Pontefract Castle, PC, with the sword. Very, very interesting old coin. This came out of a Jacques Schulman sale in the early 20s, the provenance of this one. So they fought, and even after the execution, they came out again. See, this is the castle as it would have been, surrounding this castle this way, and then going in and taking what it can. After Charles I died, they still stayed to fight in the name of Charles II. This is another one that I received. This is out of an English collection. It says Carolus Secundus. So this one, like the other one, but this is was minted for those who are fighting in defense of Charles II, as opposed to Charles I, who then was taken captive and then was killed. Now, this group of people, they resisted attacks for nearly 2 months. And so they vowed to fight to the death And then they negotiated a surrender, but the parliamentarian troops set up terms that said, okay, we'll take the castle, but all the people who were fighting us have to die, have to be put to death as traitors. And they said, excuse my French, but what the hell? If we're going to die, we're not going to walk into death. We'll fight to our death. Well, when Cromwell's troops discovered that they were going to fight to their death, they said, maybe that's not what I'm going to do. So they revised their negotiated agreement and allows every member of the garrison to make his way home. This is the two series of coins. We'll look back to the coin. Very similar. This is a little bit cruder than the second one. Okay, well, I'm going too quick. There we are. All right. Curious siege. One that's very popular, Groningen, 1672. Bernard von Galen, who was a cleric, but also a very strong military man, defended by 3,000 troops, 12 companies of citizens, and 150 students from the university. So you think all they do is protest. Now, sometimes they come up in arms, and reinforcements were sent by William of Orange. And this is what it is. This is a series of medals, Weiler medals. Hanno Weiler wrote a book of the Groningen, Munster, and Korn. And this is one of the medals, one of the numbers of medals I have. And since it's representative of both the fortress on the one side of this medal, which is about a $1.50 size, probably 54 millimeters in diameter. I just took these pictures, as you can see. And then it shows the city. It shows the city under siege and the siege works being set and ready and to go around the moat and attack. This is Belagerung von Groningen. So it's a Beleg Groningen. Very interesting, very interesting. So they opened the dikes. What happened is they destroyed all the structures, preparing it, cleared the area of trees, opened a dike, and flooded portions. That's why these things look like little bridges, because they basically built bridges to accents. They flooded the water to make it marshy, made it very, very difficult. Defenders were creative. You understand, as part of the Protestant faith at that time were Anabaptists, and those were pacifists. They refused to fight. And while they were lobbing bombs into the city, causing fires, the defenders assigned the Anabaptists, who would not fight, into putting buckets of water in front of all the houses. And then when a house would fire up, then they would have the water ready to put the fire out. So it was very creative in using even pacifists to help the cause at that time, save the buildings, and also calm the citizens and know that things in the fires would be put out. Even the university students would come in and do it. Here's this one etching at the city as they're bombarding it. You can see the flooded ground. This is a medal, again, a Weiler medal, and this was in honor of the students. They gave these to all of the students who helped fight in commemoration of them, in memoriam obsidione et liberone. Of course, that's in Latin, obsidiones, not in Dutch. And the Groningen Academia. Interesting. And this comes not only in regular size, about silver dollar size, it comes in a smaller size, about $half size. It also comes in an alternate thickness. This is a double thickness piece. It's very nice, a very nice. At any rate, you had the siege going on, and this is really what the siege looked like. And the one medal, you showed the one side and it had the fortress. This shows the battlements on the other side of the city. So if you looked at it from one angle, you looked at the battle at the other angle. Again, classic siege. You see those particular siege works being set up, even with the bridges and even with the flooded lands. They try to find a way to get in there. It rained. Fortunately, nature was with the Dutch. It rained and it rained and it rained. He was still in there fighting. The people were fighting and putting out fires, and von Galen was losing his firepower. He didn't have any more ammunition and stuff to shoot in. And with the increased range, they woke up one morning on August 27th, and the siege had been lifted, and von Galen left home. This is considered by many, the 1672 siege, considered the birth of the Netherlands. When they fought back the the Spanish in 1672. That's generally considered the point like, yep, this is a turning point. This is when we really became a country. So when we became a country. Coins were struck. You've all seen these commonly. There are 50, 25s, 12 and a half, and 6 and a quarters. And not only, and these were not done during the siege. These were struck after the siege in commemoration, like those medals were, kind of like presentation pieces. And when they were struck, they were uniface struck, but many of them were inscribed. And so I have a collection of these without inscriptions and a collection of these in there with inscriptions. And each of these, of course, are unique because they were made by somebody for a particular reason commemorating that siege. There's a 25, there's a 25 and a 5. And it's fascinating. Now, if anyone out there has a 12 and a half that's inscribed, I'm interested. I don't have a 12 and a half. I have 6 and a quarters, 50s, 25, but no 12 and a half. I've been looking for a 12 and a half stiver piece from this siege with the inscription on the back so that I can complete the type of those with them on the back. Again, shameless self-promotion. Oh, you should turn me off, Sam. I don't know. I shouldn't be not allowed to leave me on the air. Okay. Anyway, couple of sieges to go. How close are we to the end, sir?
Well, we're pretty much at about an hour right now, but I like hearing you talk, and I'm sure your audience does too. We've got a couple dozen people still with us, so I'm okay still listening.
I have two quick sieges, and they're fascinating. I'll do them even quicker.
Go for it. No, but as long as you explain them thoroughly, that's
okay. We'll do it.
Than the time. Right. Go for it.
All right. Mainz, 1793, the War of the First Coalition. French city besieged by von Kalkreuth and the Duke of Brunswick under the command of German and Austrian forces defended by French troops. It's Mayence. You'll note when I talk to the end, it becomes Mainz because that's when the Germans take over. The city becomes Mainz, not Mayence. Any rate, this is the city of Mainz. Well, the reason why I took this picture, you see the river goes through it. I'll make this rather fascinating and simple. This siege was part of the war there, you know, and between these two allied forces, and they surrounded the city and they starved it. It was a standard siege. It was starved. They starved them out so badly that what they would do is they would have the Prussian or the allied Austrian-Prussian forces would take their dead horses, lace them with poison, and they would send them down the river. Now, if you see the ramparts of the city kind of go around the river. And what that would do is the starving people would then leave where they were to try to go down to eat the tainted meat. So they had to take troops away from the perimeters to guard the rivers to keep the citizens from eating the tainted meat and dying. And that's basically what happened there. They fought and they did these things, and finally they come to an agreement. And frankly, the agreement wasn't pretty much accepted by either side. As it turned out, the defenders, the French defenders, were granted honors again through the terms, and then they left the city, and they were promising, and they had to promise not to fight the Allies for at least 1 year. And they marched out of the city singing La Marseillaise. That did not settle well with the Prussian king. He heard the news and he was infuriated, and his commanders had to answer for it when they got back. Not only was he infuriated, but the fact that 19,000 of the 21,000 or so troops that were fighting got out without actually fighting and defending the city and giving it up. The French officers that were involved in negotiating the surrender had to face trial in Paris. So it was I think in terms of a siege, it was probably a win-win. They didn't have terrible slaughters, but they tried to poison them with dead horses going through the city, and then finally agreed to we've had enough of this crap. We're going home. And they did. Now they were, and the powers that be were not happy. they produced the routine coins. You've seen these, the 5, 2, and 1 sol piece that you'll see for 1793. These are the pieces, interesting pieces. What you also probably don't know is this is the first time that they actually used paper money for sieges. And what they did with paper money is they took the French assignats, because this is 1793, and they wrote on them. And they gave it a denomination. This is a 20 livre revalued up from 10 livre note. That's a 10 livre note revalued to 20. They also had 25s revalued to 50. This is an uncut sheet of that note that you see there. This is also in my private collection. And it's really fascinating to see that they did 10 notes to a sheet. They signed them and stamped them. Rather interesting. These are the ones you normally see because after they used up all the assignats, they minted their own. And these are the notes, the monnaie de siège that were produced later in 10, 5, through multiple denominations. Yeah. Last siege, which I found fascinating. South Africa, 1902. I figured I'd start it and end it with the dates that I started with the book. Second Boer War was fought over the Britain's colonial ambitions. So it was against the South African Republic, which is Transvaal and the Orange Free State. Now the Boers had success against them because what happens is, just like many superpowers, they figure this is going to be an easy war. Kind of like Vietnam, you're going to come in and do something, it should be easy. Well, it wasn't, because those who defended their country were defending it well, and they did it here, and that's what the Boers did. Well, the overconfident British really were underprepared, and so they had to, after they lost a couple cities, they had to send troops. I have here, this is of course Transvaal and Orange Free State, the sieges in there, Mafeking, Ladysmith, they don't have a couple others. You had Okiep, Koffiefontein, Uppington, a few other things where they struck notes. They made notes as well as coins. These are the British troops coming in, and they were fighting the Boers, which were the Dutch who originally occupied the territory, and they were the guerrilla warfare guys, and they did hold them off pretty well. That persisted for 2 years. And they had to track them down. The British did a scorched earth policy, and one by one took towns and tracked down the Boers. During that time, the Boers had to provide provisions. And in order to make provisions, they produced a Inpond, the South African Republic, 1902, Inpond. And they produced that because they had to purchase stuff from the African tribes. The African tribes didn't want paper money. They wanted intrinsic value stuff, and that's what they did, and this was the gold coin. So they resorted to issuing this. This Inpond was struck by hand in pure gold at Pilgrim's Rest by P.J. Kloppers. They were on run from the British forces. Not only did they do that, but they also made cowponds, which is, these were South African Republican gold pieces that weren't struck, okay? Now, these things had rims, and they were struck at Makadodorp, and there were other ones in Leidensburg that had without rims. I just took a picture of these. Most of them were telltales because they had millings about them. So you need to, if you ever come across one of the cowponds, you need to make sure that it's authenticated because there are some very characteristic marks that have to be on them for that. Now, the reason why I would tell this is because Lord Baden-Powell, the founder of the Boy Scouts, was the one who did defended Mafeking. Mafeking struck some notes in Mafeking, and he was smart. There was a farm outside Mafeking that had a 1792 French cannon, which they put together, they called the Wolf. And this was a cannon that looked like what the Wolf would be. Why do I talk about the Wolf? Well, the Wolf appears on the note. This is the cannon on the 10-shilling note that they struck out in the wilderness to pay the troops. Now, it looks crude. Yes, it's crude. Baden-Powell designed this, and you know how they made them? They cut croquet mallets in half, and then they did wood carvings, and they imprinted these with halves of croquet mallets. And that's how the 10-shilling was made. The other notes, the smaller notes, which they also had, were taken from sheets of lined note paper, and they printed 1, 2, 3 shilling notes as well. They also did a £1 note. Again, they have the wolf, and it even says it on there, the wolf, as you can see on the cannon. This was not printed. This was photographed. They had photographically sensitive paper, and what they would do is put the chemical on it with the clear cell that's going to make the imprint, and put it out in the sun, and these £1 notes were made that way. That's how they made their siege notes, £1 notes. And if you want to know what real creativity is, these were Uppington notes, paid the soldiers at Uppington Border Scouts. These look strange because they're cloth. These were made out of shirts because they had no money, or canvas bags, and made in various denominations. Not a lot of these survived, but these are some of the most fascinating things that they had. The Uppington Border Scouts, incidentally, were the scouts that impressed Baden-Powell so much that he started the World Boy Scout organization from, because of their honor and their code and how well they served him in the war. And that was interesting. And I made this one a little short, but I did want you to see those notes and the gold that were done in the South African. And that's basically my batch of stories for right now. There are a lot more stories, and I could talk long, and I would talk too long. So I want to thank those of you who came in and listened, and thank those of you who had the perseverance to stay it to the end. So that's where it is. So if there are any questions or anything, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Lawrence, thank you so much for your presentation, sir. Folks, I'm now going to be launching a survey. It should be coming up on your screen right now. Please complete this survey before you leave our presentation. It would mean a lot to both us at the ANA and our presenter. The survey is multiple choice, but if you need to elaborate on one of your answers or have additional comments, please email them to Brianna Victor at seminars@money.org. Again, that's seminars@money.org. So, Dr. Korchnak, we've got a couple of questions that came in, if you got some time.
I have time, sure.
All right. Oh, I love this because we have a big piece on display, but I know it's not genuine in the Money Museum. Can you talk more about why Swedish plate money, or talk about why it's so large in comparison?
Swedish plate money is not siege money, it's necessity money. Swedish plate money, and it's funny you should do that because a dear friend of mine, a numismatic friend, just did a presentation at the Western Pennsylvania Numismatic Society on Swedish plate money. Sweden had a lot of copper mines. They did not have silver mines. And so they made coins, way back many, many years. In the early 1600s, they made small little square coins, the skillings, etc., in plate form. Then later on, they used bigger ones. Those bigger ones, as I understand, were used for transactions. Most of it probably was transactions between business, because when you get a 4 or 8, and then at some point there were 16, 32, and $64 pieces, which are huge hunks of copper, those had to transact. But what they had to do is they put the same amount of copper, the intrinsic value of the copper was equal to the intrinsic value of, let's say, a half a skilling, or not a skilling, a half of, the silver, half of one of their taller size pieces, or taller pieces. So they made them, the amount of copper had to correspond to what it would, if you had to sell the copper, what the amount of silver would be in a smaller piece. That being said, that's why they had to have that value, and that's why even a $4 plate earlier is bigger than a $4 plate later, because copper was either more or less money. Other thing, and I didn't know that, and I learned that through my friend Tom Corey, who gave the talk, was that one of the ways they controlled the price of copper was not exporting it, but by using it. And so it appears that a lot of the Swedish copper, they decided to use copper rather than silver, because then they could sell their copper overseas and still have the coins that they needed to transact business. But those are emergency monies or necessity money. And in some people don't even think they're necessity. They think that they may have been just done because it was good business. So yeah, That's what the Swedish plates are. And I have a $4 Swedish plate myself. I've always been fascinated by them. So it's always nice to have a piece of Swedish plate money in your house in case you get hungry and need something to eat on.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think we've got a counterfeit $10 plate downstairs in our money museum, but we do have some
Yeah,
smaller
yeah,
denominations.
yeah.
So was a weight standard kept for various forms of siege money?
If you consider, apart from the Leiden sieges where they had permission to do paper before they did silver, coins were made with intrinsic value first, and they had gold. There was gold siege, there's silver, all of that, gold, silver, copper, the whole works that was there, and they would make that. So they would make a rough coin. It would even maybe be a square, a weird, like the Haarlem piece that you saw, that silver Haarlem piece, that 32 stiver, I believe it was. That would have been a siege piece, but it had the same amount of silver intrinsically as a normal coin of the realm. When you besieged, either you were defending or besieging, you had coin of the realm to pay your troops because troops are mostly mercenaries. They went to whoever. There weren't the First National Army, I think, and I could be corrected. The First National Army was really Swedish army when Gustavus Adolphus, I think, put together a national army. That's our country's army. So most of these people, when you were fighting, there'd be a contingent of Scottish, Hungarian, Russian, English troops. And if you read a lot of the stuff in the 80 Years' War, there's even the Earl of Leicester, Dalder from Dutch, with a British guy on it who fought for the Dutch during the Dutch Revolution. So yeah, they needed to make these things, and they made them intrinsically valuable. Then when they ran out of the coin of the realm, they had to be creative, and they moved to baser metals. And what they did was, when I mean coin of the realm, then they would take the vessels and things out of churches, the aristocrat silverware, and either melt them down or strike them. If you look at some of the Landau siege pieces, 1702 siege, you see the edge of the plates are on there, or you can see sometimes the hallmarks. They just cut them up by weight and stamp them, and they would give them to the soldiers for payment. Saint Venant, the guy, the commander of the siege in Saint Venant in, I think, 1697, late 1600s, he had, as all these generals and colonels would go around, they'd bring their silverware and their wine, the carafes, and they would set up on the side. If you would see those in the movies, it's not too far from the way it was. They were special people. They didn't always lead their troops. They were sitting there in their tent. So he would take his silverware and he made that into coins. But it was intrinsic. Then when they ran out of silver and gold, if they made gold ones, then they'd make them in copper, tin, lead. They'd strip them from the roofs of the buildings, get it any way they can. That's how they would do it. Yeah.
Nice. All right, I've got oh man. All right, shameless plug time. So someone is asking, when is your book coming out? How can I get a copy? And does it include necessity coins?
The book is exclusively siege coins, not all necessity coins. All the coins in it are necessity, but they're siege coins, which are emergency coins. The book is being published by CNG. And with the COVID, everything's been delayed. As I'm in the last throes, hopefully, to get the proof so I could look at it and pick up some of my mistakes, like my typos here. I'm sure there are a few still in the book, but it should. I was hoping it would come out by this fall, but I guess it isn't. But there's no rush. It'll be out, and I'm hoping hopefully, well. I'm not going to guess because I have to wait for Mike Gesvo to tell me what it's going to be. Yeah. I don't want to put any pressure on him because they're being very nice and helpful for me in putting it together.
So, in that same line of questioning, are there any? There's a YN who's asking if you can suggest any entry-level books or references for people just starting to collect siege money. And of course, if you can recommend any siege money that might be ideal for collectors just starting out, or YNs, I suppose, especially collectors on a budget. Someone looking to add at least one or maybe a couple pieces of siege money to their collection, or books as well. What would you recommend?
Books. There are reprints, but some of the reprints of the classic books are still very expensive. All of the books on them, you would pay $50, $80, $100 or more for them. I have one book that I have copies of, Duby, which is in French. And it's because I made Xerox copies because I didn't have opportunity to do that. I had some of those that I had for sale years ago, and they're like $20 a piece, nothing much. But really, there aren't a whole lot of things. That's why I wanted to write a book. And when we were talking about publishing it, say, yeah, well, this can be this many copies of this, and I said, well, I want it to be reasonably priced. There's a French book which is excellent that came out in 2015, but that's 75, 80 euro. I'm trying to think. Oh gosh, catalogs. No, they're all fairly expensive, and even mine is likely to be $75 or $80, and that's keeping the price down. It'll be about 500 pages. Let me show you. I'll show you what are gonna soon to be published by CNG. This is what it'll be. It'll be a story. It'll be a brief description of a siege with coins like that, or in this siege. So it'll be a layout. So it'll be a catalog that you could see with whatever it is, my number, and then all the numbers of the major catalogs where it would be. So it would be cross-reference. If you can see that where you are. I don't know if you can, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But frankly, I really don't know. There are reasonable siege coins. The Siege of Mayence. Those coppers are available for under $100. You can get silver siege coins from Ulm at around the 225, 250 range. I have a couple of duplicates because as I'm doing this, I'm trying to buy coins, so I sell my duplicates. They're on eBay. If you will look at siege coins on eBay, but a number of dealers have them. If you look at some of the dealers' price lists, I'd get onto V-Coins or MA shops out of Europe. You can just type in siege or Belagerung in German, and you'll see that, and there'll be you'll see a whole bunch of siege coins. Just get familiar with it first. But I don't know. I don't know. There are some small books that were done a while. German siege pieces of the 16th century by Moritz Wormser, a reprint out of the Numismatist. You have a checklist of siege coins by Frank Lappa, which is a checklist. So there are sources like that, but they're all like more pamphlets than books. The books are more, except Duby, which is again buyable, and I don't know. I'll put one on eBay. So if anyone's interested looking, I'll put one of those on eBay for $20 to see. So if you want one, at least it'll be a catalog on siege coins.
All right. And last question we have, someone asked about those Uppington notes.
Yes.
Those are used to pay Boy Scouts?
No, those are used to pay the Uppington Border Scouts. They were the Uppington Border Scouts. That was what Lord Baden-Powell, at that time Colonel Baden-Powell, modeled the Boy Scouts from because they served him so well. They would not take anything. They had to get paid, and there was no money. There was no money to give them, so they had to use something to make notes. So the Brits used the old shirts and old canvas bags and cut them up and did that way.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, Larry, I definitely want to thank you for your time today. We have a certificate of appreciation that will be sent to you. So folks, thank you very much for joining us again for our ANA e-learning presentation today. Please join us again for our next presentation, Origins of Money by the ANA's own Money Museum curator, Douglas Mudd. This is going to be going on tomorrow at the same time, noon. We start at noon Mountain Daylight Time, so please tune in. Should be a good one.
Okay.
So again, folks, if you'd like to register for the next presentation, you can just visit the ANA website, money.org. There's a big slider going across the screen. that says ANA eLearning Academy. If you click on that, much more information to access our archives, as well as sign up for other upcoming presentations. Thanks again, everyone. Again, Dr. Korchnak, always love hearing you talk, sir.
Thank you very much. You're too flattering. Thank everyone for coming in and listening. I appreciate you having the perseverance to listen to it all. I could talk for another 3 days. We'll see you all. Bye-bye.
Have a good one, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.